All right, welcome to Persuasive Finals. Congratulations, everyone. We have all five of our judges here, so we were going to begin the rounds, and I'd like to welcome to the stage our first speaker, A. Lee.
Can everybody see and hear me okay?
Yes, we can, whenever you're ready.
Much like our community, she was complicated, messy, easy to love, and sometimes hard to understand from the outside. She loved going to Monterey Park not only because she loved to dance. She came to Monterey Park because this is where her community was. She knew that this is where the heart of the Asian American community beat strongest. This is the statement given by Moy Dae-ung's family, according to the Pasadena Star News, on January 26, 2023, after losing mother, wife, sister, and cousin in the recent Monterey Park shooting. In the days following, the media began to slowly reveal the pieces of the picture behind the tragedy. But the one question the country is waiting for still hasn't been answered. Why did he do it? Speculations of his motives included personal grudges and gender-based violence, but law enforcement has yet to uncover the truth because of the shooter's isolated lifestyle. And therein lies the problems: the isolation of AAPI communities from the outside world and the gender-based violence rooted within them. In an interview of Democracy Now! On January 24th, 2023, Dr. Connie Woon, lead of the AAPI Women Lead organization, explains how ethnic enclaves like Monterey Park were formed as a way for Asian Americans to come together amidst racism and xenophobia. But this isolationism has caused the country to turn a blind eye to the issues that pervade AAPI communities, like intimate partner violence, something that an estimated 55% of Asian women have experienced in their lifetimes. Today, I will explore the problems, causes, and solutions to an underrepresented issue facing Asian communities. Because the problems affecting our communities have been in the spotlight for several years following the COVID-19 pandemic, it is critical that we not only look at the outside threats to our communities, but the ones within them as well. It's ironic the way that the COVID-19 pandemic has been the cause of not only anti-AAPI sentiment in America, but also of an increased awareness being brought to the issues in our communities. Both results have direct impacts on the problems: gender-based violence in Asian communities and the inability of Asian women to reach out. To start, in October of 2020, the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence published a comprehensive study on violence in Asian Pacific Islander communities. Given that this is the most current and extensive data set, we'll be referencing it frequently throughout this speech. According to the aforementioned research study, up to 55% of Asian women have experienced intimate, physical, and/or sexual violence in their lifetimes. This includes emotional abuse, physical abuse, stalking, economic abuse, and sexual abuse. And though people of all genders can be subject to domestic violence, women remain far more likely to be victims of this abuse by a considerable margin. Despite these overwhelming numbers, the Los Angeles Times of January 23rd, 2023 reports that domestic violence reporting among Asian women remains far lower than those of other groups. This leads us to our next problem: the inability of Asian women to reach out. In a random sample of Vietnamese adults, only 62% of respondents knew that intimate partner violence was a crime. Not only is gender-based violence underrepresented among Asian communities, there's a distinct lack of resources available to victims of this abuse within our communities. And when resources are offered, they often lump Asian women together, ignoring the distinct political, cultural, and religious differences that are essential in how to provide aid. Reporting resources, social services, and legal procedures all lack materials in victims' native languages, creating an unequal access to the justice system in the US. Asian women suffer from abuse silently, unable to speak up and unable to reach out. In Mandarin, we call it 面子. Every language calls it something different, but it all has a similar meaning: saving face. This concept drives our next two causes: the isolation of AAPI communities from the outside world and the pressure and abuse that women face within our communities. According to the Hyphen magazine of September 25th, 2022, the COVID-19 pandemic sparked a surge of anti-AAPI violence across America. This violence fueled a growing distrust in law enforcement, government organizations, and other perceived outsiders, causing victims of abuse to fear reaching out for support outside of their own communities. The article continues, many women felt safer staying with their abusers, when the alternative could expose them not only to a deadly virus, but a world that blames them for it. But this isolationism didn't start with COVID. The Los Angeles Times of January 26, 2023 shows how xenophobia and racism relegated Asian communities to less desirable neighborhoods through the 1800s to the 1960s, forming ethnic enclaves like Monterey Park. Because these communities are so insular, patriarchal attitudes go unchecked. The aforementioned API research study shows 71% of Japanese women reported that communal family welfare, an avoidance of conflict, and aversion to seeking help all affected whether or not they reported abuse. The social stigma behind perceived broken families is deeply ingrained in Asian communities, keeping victims chained to their abusers. Victims of abuse fear that reporting this abuse could directly contribute to anti-AAPI sentiments in America. Asian women are forced to put aside their gender identity and the violence they face in their own communities for the greater cause of AAPI solidarity. While the obvious answer might seem like intervention from outside organizations, this is precisely what keeps people in ethnic enclaves silent. So it is critical that we explore two culturally affirming personal solutions. First, cultural and language-specific resources are necessary in providing women with the help that they need. Saki for South Asian Women is an organization founded by 5 South Asian women in 1989. Saki provides aid such as ESL classes, grants, digital classes, and a housing program that provides rental assistance to victims of abuse. Essentially, this organization understands the specific needs of the communities they're helping and provides real, tangible solutions. Donating to Saki allows you to help Asian women without intervening on their behalf. To take your advocacy a step further, Saki provides 60 to 90-minute long workshops on a variety of subjects, from survivor-focused strategies of de-escalation to bystander intervention, so you know how to help if someone you know is a victim of abuse. More information on how to donate or attend a workshop can be found with a QR code that I have with me at the end of the round. Aside from donating, another way to help is to actively support women who are working to improve their own communities. The Asian Pacific Islander Social Work Council is an organization that specifically supports Asian social workers. They even have a social worker bilingual scholarship, actively supporting the people who can help the most. They also accept donations, which can be found through the QR code. I live 1 city away from Rowland Heights, California, an ethnic enclave also known as Little Taipei. I hesitated on giving this speech because I didn't want to make my communities seem negative or toxic. But it's important to speak up, to make ethnic enclaves better for future generations. Today, I explored the form that gender-based violence takes within Asian communities, as well as its potential causes and solutions. The Asian American Pacific Islander community started our new year with my sincerest condolences, my deepest sympathies, and a moment of silence. But Asian women should no longer be forced to continue our own silence and no longer be kept in the darkness of our own communities.
Thank you so much. We'll give just a couple seconds for the judges to finish up their ballots, and then we'll move to speaker two. All right, if any judge is not ready, just let me know. But if not, I will invite to the stage our second speaker, Jay Shaw.
Before I begin, can everyone hear me and see me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's take a trip to Rana Plaza, a garment factory located in Bangladesh where 15-year-old Preeti works along with her sister. They live in a battered shack with about 3 other women and work long, hard hours, but Preeti doesn't complain. In fact, there's a silver lining to her dark cloud, and it comes in the form of her handsome neighbor and coworker, Shanjit. They walk home from work every single day. They get coffee, they go on ice cream dates, until they don't. Rana Plaza collapsed in 2013, killing 1,127 teenagers. Two of those were Preeti's sister and Shanjit. And Preeti didn't know what had happened to them until 13 days later when she was the one who found their bodies beneath the rubble. So many girls like Preeti spend their entire childhoods working away at these factories, not knowing if they'd be alive to see tomorrow. Today, I'm here to alert you on the ongoing fashion crisis that has accelerated because of social media and technology. I'll start off by talking about two problems in the production sector. I'll then talk about two causes because of social media. And finally, we'll discuss some solutions that we can add to our lives to make Preeti's life a little bit easier. Let's start off by discussing some problems in the fashion production sector, namely environmental and humanitarian problems. I will be using Shein, an online fast fashion retailer, as a real life model for these problems. The first problem that we'll be talking about is fashion waste. According to UN News on March 23, 2022, the fashion industry is the second most polluting industry in the world. Americans have gone from discarding 7 million to 14 million tons of clothes every single year, and this number is expected to go up by 60% by the year 2030. And unfortunately, this trend of doubling and speeding up has spread to production as well. According to McKinsey Sustainability on April 23, 2021, garment companies now release twice, even thrice as many collections as they did in the year 2000. In the year 2000, there used to be two collections, namely fall and spring, but now it can range anywhere from 5 to sometimes even 10 collections in just 1 year. Let's see what Shein has done to prevent this fashion waste phenomenon. In their sustainability report for the year 2021, they claimed that they did their utmost to acquire recycled fabric and use it in their clothing. Yet, after scouring their website for hours, and I genuinely mean hours, I only found 64 of the 52,000 listings on there to be actually made of recycled fabric. Let's now move on and talk about our second issue being workers' rights and human rights. Bangladeshi workers spend 10 to 12 hours every single day in intense heat, ingesting dust, suffering injuries to be paid nothing. Using Guardian News' interactive story, which was published in September of 2019, you've been listening to this speech for 3 minutes. And in that time, Preeti would have made 5 cents, while the garment company she works for would have made $235,000 in just the 3 minutes. And on top of the poor pay, oftentimes the factories are not even of condition. The collapse of Rana Plaza is just one example of the over 800 collapses like this in the past decade. Let's see what Shein has to say about this issue. In their social impact report for the year 2021, they said that their factories performed less than mediocre in the survey that they did. I had to dig to find out what less than mediocre actually meant, and when I did, I wasn't too happy. It means that oftentimes these factories didn't have emergency drills. They don't have emergency flight of stairs to escape. They don't have rules in what to do in case of an emergency. In fact, we don't even know where their factories are located. When reporters asked them specific questions, they chose to make broad statements about a fair and joyous work environment instead. Shein, hand in hand with social media, has led to our two major causes, being the emergence of microtrends and the normalization of overconsumption. Let's start off by discussing microtrends, or trends that are pieces of clothing and items that go in and out of style very, very quickly, states Untitled Magazine on April 23, 2021. Ultra fast fashion no longer depends on what's on the runway or what's on the front page of a magazine. It now depends on what's on TikTok and on Instagram, and chances are by the time you see a piece of item on your feed, it's already going out of style. This has messed with our traditional fashion cycle. HeuroTech News says on January 27, 2022, that the fashion cycle consists of 5 stages: the introduction, the rise, the peak, the decline, and the obsolescence. With this new social media strategy, it's crammed into 1 or maybe even just 2 stages. Shein has actually taken advantage of this change and uses it to create and sell more products. According to Guardian News, published on April 10, 2022, only 6% of Shein's inventory remains in stock for more than 90 days, meaning that when a new product goes viral all over social media, they stop production on existing inventory and start production on newer items. This brings us to our second cause, being the normalization of overconsumption. If you're on social media, chances are you've seen videos of try-on hauls, unboxings, and what I bought for $30 from whatever store. These videos have grown in popularity and promote buying products. According to Highlander News on January 18, 2022, companies like Shein take advantage of this and market to younger consumers. They take advantage of their presence also on social media, and they take advantage of users being able to take sponsorships. Their products are also of low quality and hence lower cost, meaning that their younger consumers can actually purchase this product. Emma Majoy, an anthropologist and a professor of marketing at the University of British Columbia, stated on April 21, 2020, that there's a significant connection between the price of a cloth that was bought at and the incline people have to throw it away. Meaning that people throw away clothing that they bought for cheaper prices because it isn't worth that much anyway. This means that Pretty has to do more work for a lesser amount of money. With overconsumption coming at such a fast pace and at such a low cost, is there even a solution? Luckily for you, I've got something up the sleeve of my thrifted blazer. Here are 3 solutions that we can implement into our lives to make Pretty's life a little easier. First, on a global scale, spread word and get to know about the UNFCCC. This stands for the United Nations Fashion Charter on Climate Change. This charter encourages garment companies to sign a net zero carbon emissions promise by the year 2050. And if financially possible for you, purchase from garment companies who have signed this petition and are genuinely trying to work towards this goal. The second solution would be to donate to and spread word about the Clean Clothes campaign. They function all around the world fighting for workers' rights. In 2019, they were able to not only get Thailand garment workers their full severance pay, but any minimum wage violations that were made by the NBC Universal Company. And this was all possible because of the donations and the support that was provided by the community that the Clean Clothes campaign created. And finally, on a more personal level, here's a solution that you can do from the safety of your home. Before hitting that place order button on whatever website you're shopping from, go on goodonyou.com. This website lists garment companies based on their sustainability rating, 1 being absolutely horrible and 5 being amazing. So when you're shopping and you sadly find out that the brand you're purchasing from is a 1 or a 2 on this rating scale, it also provides you alternatives in terms of style and price point. I will provide all of these resources in the link that I will paste into the chat after my speech. To tie it all up with a sustainably produced ribbon, today we talked about fast fashion's main problems. We talked about the causes for these problems, and finally, we talked about some solutions to implement. Fashion is now no longer about the style or the cut or the stitch of the clothes that we're wearing. It's about whose blood was spilled to make them. And together, as a community, we can strive to make fashion fun again by making sure that the only thing Preeti would have had to worry about is if Shanjit would have liked her back.
All right, if any judge is not ready, just let me know. And if not, I will invite our third speaker to the stage, H. Lee.
By her sophomore year of college, Sasha knew she didn't want children. She didn't want to experience pregnancy, go through childbirth, or take on the financial burden of raising a child. So she began looking into permanent contraception in the form of a tubal ligation, a procedure which would tie her fallopian tubes to prevent pregnancy. But when she went to her doctor, she was heavily discouraged from undergoing the procedure, with her doctor ultimately refusing to go through with the surgery. Sasha's experience is mirrored in countless women, trans people, and non binary people who have encountered obstacles when considering permanent birth control. According to the Daily Beast, on October 17th, 2021, people struggle to obtain tubal ligations and other sterilization surgeries due to pushback from doctors who fear their patients might regret their choice. And while avoiding pregnancy is one reason people seek sterilization, there are countless others, like affirming someone's gender identity and stopping painful periods. The reasons someone might want these surgeries are surprisingly simple. Yet, getting a doctor to perform one is anything but. In June of 2022, the Supreme Court decided to overturn Roe v. Wade, which guaranteed the right to an abortion, forcing us to reimagine a future without a safe and legal way to end a pregnancy. If this is our new reality, we need more options to prevent pregnancy. So today, we must address the barriers to permanent contraception that women and many others face by tackling the problems, causes, and presenting some necessary solutions. Because, as the Los Angeles Times states, on July 19th, 2022, we are being stripped of our bodily autonomy. And this is only the beginning. The legal age to get a tubal ligation is between 18 and 21, depending on the state. But many patients are still considered too young for the procedure. This type of mindset is part of our two problems: the difficulties of getting sterilized and the consequences on people's lives. First, getting a doctor to perform sterilization surgeries is exceptionally challenging, especially for people under the age of 30. The Conversation on December 9th, 2022 explains that patients seeking a tubal ligation are often turned away by doctors for reasons including a person's age and the potential risk of regret, as if those are valid reasons to deny someone a potentially life-saving procedure. But doctors also fear legal culpability and backlash from the medical community. and use conscientious objection as a workaround to avoid performing these surgeries. Conscientious objection is the refusal to provide care due to a doctor's personal beliefs. And unfortunately, it's not just individual practitioners who can make this choice. According to the Colorado Sun, on January 31st, 2023, the only hospital in Durango, Colorado, has banned tubal ligations after vaginal births and now after C-sections. An entire hospital refuses to give women the ability to choose what their futures look like. The consequences of not receiving a sterilization surgery can be extremely damaging. Mayo Clinic on January 9th, 2021 finds that uterine ablations, which remove the lining of the uterus, can help women who suffer from fibroids, endometriosis, and painful periods. For trans and non-binary people, this could mean not having a period at all, a huge step in gender affirmation. It also, most obviously, eliminates the risk of unplanned pregnancies. Vox on January 20th, 2023 reports that today, just being pregnant is a risk. High maternal and infant death rates, being denied care during a miscarriage, and difficulties obtaining abortions are just the start. But when women actively choose to opt out of a future that includes these risks, they are denied and told that the choice they're making with their own bodies is invalid. No one asks a woman before getting pregnant, what if you change your mind? Even though raising a child impacts someone's life far more than getting sterilized does. This leads us to our two causes: patriarchal values and their effects on our institutions. First, questioning women's right to choose is normalized, especially in medicine. According to Colombian News Service, on February 15, 2022, doctors often cite a study that claims 20% of women regret getting sterilized. The problem is that this study is over 20 years old, and many of the women agreed to be sterilized while heavily medicated after a C-section, an entire problem of its own. But regardless of this study, and even if some women do regret it, it's not for a doctor to decide. The aforementioned Daily Beast article states that some doctors require their patients to undergo a psychological evaluation before they agree to perform the procedure. This not only creates an additional barrier, but also implies that the decision to not have children is a result of a mental illness, as opposed to an informed choice. Additionally, the laws that are currently in place are outdated. Historically, women were sterilized without their consent, usually when they were already undergoing childbirth or a similar surgery. Vice News on May 7, 2019 notes that many of the current laws, like one that requires a month-long wait between agreeing to and receiving the procedure, are meant to protect women from this. But this ignores the fact that many women are wanting the procedure, in some cases, desperately. The article tells the story of Erin Thompson, who struggled for 2 years to have a tubal ligation, with her physician even asking for a signed consent form from her husband. She struggled with contraceptives that wreaked havoc on her body, until her partner just decided to have a vasectomy, which was completed in under a week. Laws originally designed to protect us are being manipulated, weaponized, and used against us. Changing the laws that govern medical institutions is not only difficult, but takes years to accomplish, time that many who seek sterilization do not have. Our two solutions are personal. They are ways to advocate for yourself or the people you know who might need these surgeries. First, there are ways to expedite the process of getting a tubal ligation. Think of it as hacking the medical system. One of the beautiful parts of the internet is the crowdsourcing that happens when power structures work to keep us down. Members of the subreddit r/childfree have worked for years to compile the names of hundreds of doctors spanning across all 50 states who have performed sterilization surgeries in the past. These groups also share how they convince their doctors to perform the surgeries and useful comebacks for the most common questions they received. Both of these are available on this flyer, which you can all access through the link in the chat after my speech. It's also important that we don't continue the stigma ourselves. If someone doesn't want kids, believe them. Don't tell them they'll change their mind one day. Interpersonal conversations make their way to classrooms, political spaces, and doctors' offices. Don't contribute to the stigma. Next, everyone in this video room needs to support organizations that fight for reproductive rights. Last year, Louisiana lawmakers proposed a bill that would make the use of IUDs and Plan B punishable as murder. We are truly living in a dystopian future. And if we're not careful, the surgeries mentioned in this speech could be banned in some states. It is critical that we support organizations working to cement reproductive rights through grassroots work and through legislation. And if you're lucky enough to live in a state that supports these rights, donate to advocacy groups in the states that don't, because they are fighting for the people who are the most disenfranchised. Access to birth control is actively being restricted. By exploring the problems, causes, and solutions to this issue, we can work toward a future with guaranteed reproductive health care for all. We can't let doctors keep turning away people who need it, because we all deserve autonomy over our own bodies.
All right, thank you. And we will move on to our fourth speaker. If a judge needs another minute or so, just let me know. Okay, if not, we will go to our fourth speaker, B. Bretzinger.
All right, can everybody see and hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
The day after Christmas in 2019, Maria Kuhn was driving with her family on a winding country back road through the falling rain. As she rounded the corner, Maria heard tires skidding on wet asphalt up ahead. Before she could even process what was happening, the oncoming driver lost control of his vehicle and crashed into her car head-on, leaving Maria and her mother with broken sternums and ruptured intestines. In every sense of the word, it was an accident. But as Maria told Miss Magazine on August 10th, 2022, she doesn't refer to her car crash as an accident because her injuries were completely predictable. GovTech on December 15th, 2022 explains that women are much more likely than men to be seriously injured and even die in car accidents. The Insurance Institute of Highway Safety in May 2022 claims that this gender danger gap isn't because women are more likely to drive recklessly or to be in accidents. Rather, cars are not designed and tested with women's safety in mind. They are simply an afterthought. Today, let's explore the unique safety problems that female drivers face in car collisions. Next, we'll look at the causes of this lack of regard for women's safety. And finally, we'll discuss some solutions to protect women behind the wheel. Because, as the Washington Post on December 21st, 2022 states, we are living in a world designed by men. And it's costing us our lives. In July 2019, Hannah Strank was struck head-on by a car. While her male passengers walked away with minor injuries, Hannah suffered from a fractured spine and torn intestines. So let's examine two unique safety problems faced by female drivers in car crashes: an increased risk of injury and an increased risk of death. First, women are much more likely than men to suffer from a severe injury in a car accident. A study conducted by the University of Virginia Center for Applied Biomechanics found that women wearing seatbelts are 73% more likely to be seriously injured in a car accident, even after accounting for collision severity, age, body mass index, height, and make and model of the car. The Guardian on May 17, 2022 adds that women are also more likely to suffer from longer-term injuries to the hips, spine, and abdomen. In other words, holding everything else constant, women are in far greater danger than men the moment they get behind the wheel. Second, it's not just more injuries that female drivers face. The Smithsonian Magazine on November 4th, 2022 reveals that, along with an increased risk of severe injury, women are 17% more likely to die in a car accident. Jennifer Stockberger, director of Consumer Reports' Auto Trade Center, claims that the gender danger gap is only becoming more apparent. She explains that we have all benefited from the latest advancements in car safety features, such as collision prevention assistance and backup cameras. But once those major areas have been improved upon, the less obvious differences in safety, say gender, become much more evident. In short, we are all misled by 5-star safety ratings into thinking we're all as equally safe behind the wheel. Hannah and Maria were left reeling after their car accidents, wondering why their bodies were so badly battered and bruised. Like many researchers in the past few years, they discovered 2 causes for the increased threat to female drivers' safety: testing discrimination and crash test dummies, and a lack of regulatory rules. First, crash test dummies have long been used to recreate human experiences, but they're severely outdated. According to Travelers United on October 6, 2022, crash test dummies have always been based on men. In the mid-1940s, the first crash test dummy was created to help protect pilots during World War II, and it represented the person, at the time, who was most likely to be in the cockpit: an adult man. Over 75 years later, though, Discover magazine on February 16, 2021 says that design hasn't changed much. In fact, the first female crash test dummy wasn't created until 2011. But even then, Autoblog on November 10, 2022 says that the female crash test dummy isn't representative of the average female body. You see, the female crash test dummy is actually just a shrunken down male dummy. At only 4'11" and a whopping 108 pounds, this so-called female crash test dummy is only representative of 5% of women. The whole point of a crash test dummy is to be as representative of as many people as possible. But because automobile makers think that the average female body is more reminiscent of a prepubescent child, car design is inherently biased toward protecting male bodies. For example, MSN on December 15, 2022 explains that women typically have broader hips and wider pelvises. This results to more injuries to the hips and spines in car collisions than we see in male drivers, because cars are considered safe only if they protect male bodies. Though automobile makers might think otherwise, women are not just smaller versions of men. Second, even these woefully inadequate dummies aren't being used in testing. CNN on December 15, 2022 states that automobile makers are not legally required to test anything other than the average adult man. Even though the female crash test dummy is egregiously inaccurate, automobile makers aren't even doing the bare minimum to protect female drivers. Furthermore, BBC News on October 28, 2022 says that on the rare instances when the female crash test dummy is used, it is not placed in the driver's seat. Instead, automobile makers are still basing their safety ratings on the 1950s idea that women are always in the passenger seat. It's no wonder female drivers are more likely to be seriously injured and even die in car accidents because of this gender inequity in car design. After their accidents, Hannah and Maria became advocates on the gender danger gap, and they've co-authored several pieces together to inform legislators and drivers of this gender bias. So now, let's turn to solutions on the legislative and personal scope for protecting female drivers. On a governmental level, the U.S. needs to require automobile makers to test both male and female crash test dummies in the driver's seat. Now, you might be wondering how this will change anything if the female version is so woefully inadequate. Thankfully, at the very end of last year, Swedish engineer Astrid Linder created the first female crash test dummy modeled after the average female body. She told NPR on November 1st, 2022, that her crash test dummy takes into account differences in joint stiffness, muscular structure, centers of gravity, and much more between male and female bodies. However, she urges us that this is merely the first step. Now, we need legislation that requires automobile makers to use this more accurate female crash test dummy. Advocates of vehicle equity rules in transportation, or Verity Now, have started a petition to U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg to introduce legislation that requires more equitable safety standards. Please, consider signing this petition using the link I will provide in the chat after the round. The hard work of making a bill has already been done for us. And now we just need to push Congress to address these antiquated safety standards to prevent needless injuries and deaths. In the meantime, we need to do what we can right now to protect female drivers. The easiest way to protect yourself and your loved ones is to fix your driver's seat. Driver's Education Access to November 14th, 2022 reminds women that we might need to make a few adjustments to our vehicles. And I've created the ABC acronym to help us remember these changes. A, adjust the steering wheel so it's pointed towards your chest, so your head or neck isn't hit if the airbag is deployed. B, back up the driver's seat to be at least 10 inches away from the steering wheel. And C, check that the shoulder strap of your seatbelt lays on your chest, not under your arm or on your neck, and that the lower strap lays snugly across your hips. Though these ABC changes may seem small, they can help protect female drivers right now, while we push for Congress to protect them nationwide. In review, we covered the gender danger gap in car collisions, took a look at the causes for this lack of care for women's safety, and finally, discussed some solutions on the legislative and personal scope for protecting women behind the wheel. Hannah and Maria still flinch whenever they see passing cars or whenever they drive in the rain. But they're one of the lucky ones, because they survived. Until we take more drastic measures to protect half of the population, our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters might not be so lucky. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. If any judge is not ready, just let me know. Okay, I will invite to the stage our next speaker, our fifth speaker, Jay Acosta.
Can everyone hear me and see me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Are we ready?
Yep, whenever you are.
For months, Leon Simmons would wake up in the morning filled with dread knowing he had to go to work at a warehouse in Ontario, California. He knew what he would have to face on the warehouse floor: constant racial slurs, discriminatory treatment, and when he tried reporting the abuse, retaliation. When they look you right in the eye and call you the N-word to your face, that's dehumanizing, Leon said. In one case, a coworker waved a banana in his face and called him a monkey. White supremacy has historically been viewed as the primary motivator in workplace discrimination, but Leon's aggressors weren't white, they were Latina. According to the LA Times on August 22nd, 2022, the two largest racial discrimination cases in the state were filed by Black individuals who had been discriminated against by Latinas. And these cases, which were brought by the federal government, were huge, with the abuse potentially affecting hundreds of Black employees at warehouses across the state. As people of color, Latinas are often seen as the victims of discriminations, not the perpetrators. But in low-wage workplaces, where Latinas now form the majority, there's often a hierarchy enforced that harms Black workers. It is irresponsible to ignore how anti-Blackness within communities of color still persists, and the immense psychological and financial tolls it has on working-class Black communities. Today, we will explore the problems, causes, and solutions to a racial problem that's rarely in the spotlight. Because as law professor Tanya Hernandez states, anti-Blackness is a global phenomenon, and we as Latinas cannot ignore our role in upholding it. Leon remembers seeing phrases like, "Go back to Africa," written on the bathroom stalls at work. When he would cross it out, he would just see it written again the next day. This is reflective of our problems: a racial hierarchy that denies Black workers opportunities and leads to wrongful termination. First, according to the University of Illinois Public Health, on February 2nd, 2021, Black and Latina workers are overrepresented in low-wage jobs, and oftentimes make up the racial majority. But the aforementioned Times article found that Latinas specifically make up as much as 3/4 of some low-wage workplaces, far outnumbering their Black counterparts. As the majority in many workplaces, the potential for abuse of that power increases. This means that hierarchies that harm Black workers end up forming quietly and create foundations of racism and abuse in the workplace. Bloomberg Law as of August 23, 2022, states that in a racial discrimination lawsuit against Tesla, Black workers are discriminated against in job assignments, subject to unequal pay, and kept from promotions. They were forced to work overtime, given the toughest manual labor task, and consistently threatened with termination. This can only be described as blatant racism, but because the aggressors are Latina, it's much more difficult to target. Second, when Black employees attempt to report their experiences, they're usually fired or ignored. According to the Wall Street Journal on September 22nd, 2022, when employees tried filing complaints about the treatment they were facing at Cardinal Health, they were ignored by their superiors. And slowly, both the employees and the complaints began to disappear. Cardinal Health was firing any employee that attempted to report the racism that they experienced, along with erasing any evidence of the complaints. In the worst cases, Black workers are subject to harsher abuse as retaliation. And because Black workers have been kept out of leadership positions, they have no ability to make any changes to the environment around them on a systemic level. No ability to advocate for their friends or for themselves. Something that caught Leon by surprise was the fact that he grew up with Mexican friends. He thought his Latina coworkers would be his allies, not his tormentors. Let's explore the origins of this issue, the assumption that people of color cannot be racist, and the fact that data is only taken on the victims of racial discrimination lawsuits and rarely the perpetrators. First, there is the assumption that people of color cannot be racist, since they also experience racism and discrimination themselves. But Fordham Law as of July 21st, 2022 states that this ignores the fact that colorism and anti-Blackness are insidious and extremely prevalent amongst the Latina community. Discrimination has been viewed in a black and white paradigm, ignoring the nuances of how white supremacy is interwoven across cultures. Many Latin American countries have similar racial hierarchies as the US, with lighter-skinned Latinas at the top and Black and Indigenous Latinas at the bottom. This bleeds into cultural attitudes, with a 2021 Pew Research study finding that over half of Latinas had heard racist comments and jokes at home. And when a group upholds whiteness as the standard, they inevitably end up benefiting from it. According to EEOC records, prejudice can affect any race or ethnicity. However, Black victims still represent the overwhelming majority of discrimination cases. Over the last decade, nearly 3 times as many racial discrimination lawsuits were filed by Black individuals compared to Latinas and Asian people. And while we have demographic data on the victims of racial discrimination lawsuits, the race of the perpetrators is rarely recorded. According to the LA Times on August 22nd, 2022, although hiring agencies track the race and ethnicity of victims, they do not compile official statistics on offenders. This makes it difficult to gauge the extent of anti-Black hostility from Latina workers. This also leads to the assumption that those discriminating are white, erasing any details necessary to actually do something to fix workplace racism. According to the Washington Post on October 10, 2022, by only looking at the victim's race and ethnicity in discrimination cases, it leaves out the information of an entire second part. Information that is so important, so easy to collect, and yet is left out of surveys. In October of 2022, news broke out of a recorded conversation between multiple Latina city council members in Los Angeles, making racist comments about a fellow council member's adopted Black son. Yet, only one council member resigned. The rest still serve. When we allow this kind of racism to exist in any workplace, it will inevitably seep everywhere. Let's look at potential solutions to make workplaces more equitable. First, for structural change to happen, we need to examine how our own communities have been upholding white supremacist ideals and continue to promote anti-Blackness. And this is not limited to the Latina community. Conversations about anti-Blackness have to be present in all non-Black communities. They have to become normalized. With me, I have resources from Latino USA, Mochi Magazine, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which gives tips on how Latina, Asian, and white communities can all have productive conversations about anti-Blackness. As a Latina individual, I know from experience that these conversations can be met with defensiveness, anger, and just straight up ignorance. But we can't make things better if we don't have these hard conversations. There are also groups actively working to combat anti-Blackness within low-wage workplaces. In Los Angeles, nonprofit organizations such as the Community Coalition have built Black and Latina alliances to address racial disparities. Information for how to donate will be provided after the round. Finally, on a personal level, we need to be more critical of how we use the term people of color. By lumping ethnic and racial groups that are completely different together, we ignore important racial nuances that allow racism to continue. According to the Harvard Business Review on December 8, 2021, POC is at best a lazy catch-all, a label given to anyone who is not white. At worst, it is a way to dilute and ignore the different experiences that Black, Latina, Asian, people of Middle Eastern descent, and Indigenous people all have. When we see people using terms like POC when they're really just referring to Black people specifically, we need to kindly question and challenge the people using them. Remember, the words we use matter. And if we can change our labels, we can change the way people are being treated. Leon did not deserve the treatment that he received, and neither did the thousands of his fellow coworkers. Today, we explore the problems, causes, and solutions to a racial problem that's rarely in the spotlight. Holding up a mirror to our communities is difficult, but it is always an important and necessary step in creating a just world for all of us.
All right, thank you so much. And if any judge is not ready, just let me know right now. Okay, and with that, I invite our last speaker to the stage, E. Joseph.
Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure I'm getting my laptop full screen here. Okay. Perfect.
For years, there were signs that something was wrong with the water on Ben Sweeney's farm. The cows weren't producing as much milk, him and his wife weren't feeling well, and his grandkids were getting rashes. He tested the water and found that it was full of salt. His suspicions on whom to blame lied on a nearby road. Each year, the New York Department of Transportation dumps 30,000 pounds of salt on State Route 26, which runs past Sweeney's 300-acre farm in Boonville. By the time he had realized it had seeped into his drinking water, him and his wife were consuming more than 490 milligrams of salt in every liter of drinking water, equating to 16 times the national average. In early 2004, New York officials admitted that they had poisoned his water with salt. In years since, Sweeney's Farm has called immediate attention to New York's polluted water crisis, affecting both the ecosystem and local water supplies. But another fact remains unreported. Away from the New York farm, the salt pollution was no better. In fact, it was worse. According to an estimate done by the Carey Institute for Ecosystem Studies, more than 20 million metric tons of salt are dumped on U.S. roads each winter, equating to 123 pounds per American. This growing body of research is raising concerns about whether road salts are considered safe for environment and public health. Thus, the fact remains clear. We must reevaluate our use of road salts. So let's explore some problems, causes, and solutions. Because the Director of Enterprise for Energy and Environment, Myron Ebel, says that he would like to have more money so that he can combat the nonsense put out by the environmental movement. That is, the 70-year-old wealthy man won't have to deal with the damages of these effects. Me and my children will. My mom's one rule in life is to leave an impact that outlives you. And my one rule in life is to listen to my mom. So you're probably thinking, the highest amounts of salt I've ever seen in one place at a time are in those tiny soy sauce packets from Panda Express. So this is either fake news, absolutely terrifying, or both. But 2020 U.S. Geological Survey explains of all salt consumed in the United States each year, 43% is used for highway de-icing. So let's explore two causes: short-sighted gains and salt accumulation. First, that road salt's short-term effects fail to recognize the long-term environmental impacts. GreenMatter.org explains that although road salts can reduce highway accidents by up to 85%, after 25 years, the long-term adverse ecological drawbacks become irreversible. This gets even worse, with Smithsonian Magazine writer Joseph Stromberg reporting in a 2017 article. As more of the U.S. becomes urbanized and suburbanized, the mounting piles of salt we dump on roads are becoming a bigger problem that we keep disregarding. Second, the accumulation of salt in water systems is irreversible. Research conducted by the Environmental Protection Agency in February of 2022 explains that once salts enter waterways, there are no biological processes to remove them. Detrimentally, the very same salt that ran off into waterways last year still remain in our waterways this year. GreenMatter.org shares studies suggest the increased salinity concentration we see in many places may be the result of road salt spread decades and decades ago, which reached groundwater and is only now slowly reaching surface waters. Between short-sighted gains and salt accumulation, we have two effects: contaminating drinking water and irreversible damages to wildlife. First, without knowing it, roadways had been contaminating our drinking water. The Environmental Protection Agency of 2022 shares road salts contaminate waterways by infiltrating nearby waters, such as reservoirs and wells. Additionally, researchers from the U.S. Geological Survey uncovered a strong correlation between high levels of sodium in water and high levels of radium. A recent study conducted from the University of Toledo found that the heightened level of salt in water makes radon, mercury, and lead more likely to move around, meaning that these harmful chemicals can more easily make their way from water pipes into our drinking glasses. Because there is no way to remove salt from ecosystems, when introduced, salt becomes a persistent problem. An increasing body of evidence reveals that the growing amount of residual salt accumulation is causing long-term damage to wildlife and plant communities, both on wetlands and on dry grounds. A 2014 study conducted by the U.S. Geological Survey found that 84% of the urban streams studied had a high rise in chloride levels, and 29% exceeded public safety guidelines.